Hello again everyone, welcome to the Royfit channel. Today you're joining me for part 2 of our bones, joints and anatomical planes videos. So last episode, or the previous video, we spoke about the name of bones and the location of them bones in the body and where they join to. Today we're going to be talking about what bones are made from, what is made in the bones, the type of bones you'll find in your body, the process of renewing bones, maintenance, repair, that kind of thing, what makes up joints, the types of joints, and what body parts have what joints. So let's dive in. Right, bones are made up of living tissue, which have their own blood vessels and are made up of various cells, proteins, minerals, and vitamins. Now, this structure enables them to grow, transform, and repair themselves all throughout your life. Now, as I mentioned previously, we're born with about 300 soft bones. During childhood and adolescence, cartilage grows and is slowly replaced by hard bone. And again, as I've already said, some of these bones fuse together, so you're left with around about 216 by the time you're an adult. So now then, we're going to jump into a bone's composition. So what makes up bones? So you have something called osteoblast cells. So these secrete an osteoid matrix. So these are basically all the ingredients for unmineralized bone. And that matrix is comprised of type 1 collagen, that makes up 94% of it, non-collagenous proteins and inorganic minerals. So as you can guess, the inorganic minerals are stuff like calcium and phosphate. So the hardness of the bone is due to the presence of mineral salts in the osteoid matrix. So basically this is a crystalline complex of calcium and phosphate known as hydroxyapatites. So calcified bone, so this is the mineralized bone, like the finished product. This contains about 25% organic matrix, so that about 2 to 5% are cells still, 5% of which is water, and 70% is inorganic minerals, which again include calcium and phosphate, known as hydroxyapatites. Now, bones are not the same all the way through. They actually consist of a couple of layers. So you have your compact bone, also known as the cortical bone. So this hard outer layer is strong and dense. There are cylindrical structures that pass through this layer called osteons that contain the mineral matrix and living osteocytes, which are connected by canalliculi. Quite a mouthful there. So basically these are just microscopic canals. Now their job is to transport blood, and they are aligned parallel along the axis of the bone, so they go straight through the bone like this. And you've also got cancellous bone, also known as a trabecular bone. So this is the spongy inner layer network. This is much lighter and less dense than the cortical bone. The spaces between this spongy layer are often filled with marrow and blood vessels. Now, bone marrow actually holds stem cells called hemocytoblasts. Now, these are actually what turn into the blood cells in our body. Now, the process of creating blood cells is a very in-depth topic, so I will make a video on that in the future. So here you go, as you can see here, we've got the cancellous layer right here, which is the inner layer, the nice spongy layer. And then we've got the compact bone just here along the outside. And if you look here, we've also got the osteon. These are little circles here that carry blood all the way through the bone. Now then, you might think that all the bones in your body are the same, but there are actually types, and these are based on their structure, shape and size. So there are 6 types. You've got the long bone, the short bone, the flat bones, the sutural bones, the sesamoid bones, and the irregular bones. We'll start off with the long bones. Now, the long bones, it's in the name, are longer than they are wide, and have a shaft with two ends. So you've got the diaphysis, also known as the central shaft, as you can see here, it's labelled here. Now this is the section of the bone that contains the marrow in the marrow cavities. The rounded ends are called the epiphysis, and they are covered with angular cartilage and are filled with red bone marrow, which produces the red blood cells as mentioned before. Most of the limb bones are long bones. If, for example, you got the femur, the tibia, the ulna and the radius. Now exceptions to this are the patella, which is your kneecap, and a few bones in the wrist and the ankle. Now then, next on our list is the short bones, or also known as the cuboidal bones. Now these are bones that are the same width and length, giving them a cube-like shape. Now an example of this bones are in the wrist, so the carpals, and the ankles, the tarsals. Now these are all short bones. Thirdly, we've got flat bones. Now these are thin and relatively broad bones that are found where excessive protection of organs are required, or where broad surfaces of muscles need to attach. Now examples of flat bones are the sternum or the breastbone, the ribs, you've got the scapula, the roof of your skull. Those are all flat bones. For the fourth one, we've got irregular bones. Now these bones actually come in quite complex shapes. These bones may have short, flat, notched or ridged surfaces. Examples of irregular bones are the vertebrae, the hip bone and a couple of skull bones as well. Now for the fifth one, we've got the sesamoid bones. Now these are small flat bones and are shaped similar to a sesame seed, hence the name sesamoid. Now an example of a sesamoid bone is the patella. Now sesamoid bones develop inside tendons and may be found near joints at the knee, hands and feet. Now then, we're on to our last type of bone here, the sutural bones. Now these are small, flat, irregular shaped bones that may be found between flat bones of the skull, and they vary in number and size and position. Now as you can see here by this lovely diagram, we've got some locations of these bones and which ones they belong to. So flat bones, as said before, your sternum. Irregular bones such as your vertebrae. Short bones in your fingers and your toes. We've got the sesamoid bone, which is in your patella, which is your kneecap. And we've got the long bone, femur, humerus, that kind of thing. Now then, our next point of conversation today is the process of bone renewal. Now then, cells in our bones are responsible for bone formation, reabsorption, maintenance and remodelling. And these are done through three different cells. So we've got the osteoblasts. Now these cells are derived from stem cells that are responsible for bone matrix synthesis. They are the cells that excrete the osteoid matrix and is subsequent in the mineralization. Now in adult skeleton, the majority of bone surfaces are not undergoing any kind of formation or reabsorption, and they're not really being remodeled, so therefore they are lined with bone lining cells. Next we've got the osteocytes. Now then, these cells are like osteoblasts that became incorporated in the newly formed osteoid. So basically what this means is eventually this becomes part of the calcified bone. Osteocytes stimulate deep in the bone matrix, maintain contact with newly incorporated osteocytes in the osteoid. And with osteoblasts and bone lining cells on the surface, for an extensive network of cell processes, the Cancellous. Now, they are thought to be ideally situated to respond to changes in physical forces upon the bone and to convert these messages to cells on the bone's surface. basically directing them to initiate formation and reabsorption responses. Now, the third cell we're going to be talking about today in the process of bone renewal is the osteoclasts. Now, these cells are large multinucleoli cells and are actually derived from the hematopoietic lineage. It's quite a mouthful there. Basically, what that is stem cells that become blood cells. But this one's taken a different route and become an osteoclast instead. So an osteoclast's function is in the reabsorption of mineralized tissue, and they're found attached to the bone's surface at the sites of active bone reabsorption. Their characteristic feature is a ruffled edge where active reabsorption takes place with the secretion of acid and bone reabsorbing enzymes. So basically what happens is these cells come along, they secrete a load of acid and enzymes that eat up the bone, break it back down into its base components where it can be repaired, remodeled and maintained. Now we're going to be moving on to what makes up joints. Now joints, particularly hinge joints like the elbow or the knee, are complex structures made up of bone, muscle, synovial membrane and synovial fluid, along with cartilage, ligaments and the bursas. Joints are designed to bear weight and move the body through space. So we'll start off talking about the cartilage. Now this is actually a type of tissue that covers the surface of the bone at the joint. Cartilage helps reduce the friction of movement in the joint. Now you also have the synovial membrane. Now this is a tissue that lines the joints and basically seals it all inside a capsule. Now we've got synovial fluid, which I'm fairly certain you would have heard before, maybe in school or something. And basically this is now this is secreted by the synovial membrane. It's a clear sticky fluid around the joint, and this works like a lubricant, like when you put oil in your car or you got a squeaky door handle, you chuck a bit of oil in there, works amazing. Now then, we've got ligaments. Strong ligaments, tough elastic bands of connective tissues. Now these surround the joints and give them support, but they also limit the joint's movements as well, so they won't hyperextend. Now ligaments connect bones together basically. We've also got the tendons. So this is another type of tough connective tissue, and this will sit on each side of the joint attached to the muscle and will help it control the movement of the joint itself. And lastly, we got the bursas. So this is a fluid filled sac between the bones and the ligaments or other nearby structures, and they basically help to cushion the friction of the joint as well. So if you look here, we've got the ligaments on the outside of the bone, we've got the synovial membrane here. Now the tendons would also be here as well, but they're unfortunately not in this diagram, and the bursas isn't in this diagram either, just because I think of the angle it's supposed to be, but the bursas would sit about here on the bones. Now we're going to be talking about the type of joints that a person has. Now there are joints called fixed joints, like those in our skull, and facet joints like those in our vertebrae. But the ones that we're going to focus on are our mobile joints. So to start off with, we've got our ball and socket joints. Ball and socket joints, such as the shoulder and hip joints, allow backwards, forwards, sideways and rotating movements. We've also got the hinge joints. Hinge joints, such as in the fingers, knees, elbows and toes, allow only bending and straightening movements. We've also got pivot joints. Pivot joints, such as neck joints, allow limited rotation movements. So this kind of movement and like this as well. Now then, we've also got ellipsoidal joints. Ellipsoidal joints allow for all of the movements said above apart from pivot, as you can see here by this diagram again. Ball and socket joints located on the shoulder here and the hip, pivot joints in the neck, ellipsoidal joints in the wrist, and hinge joints in the elbows and knee. Alright, and that wraps up today's video on bones and joints. Now, next video I will be going into anatomical planes and the actual movements that joints allow us to do, such as rotation and abduction. So I hope you're going to join me for that one. Thank you all for watching, and once again, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.